everyone, this is Hazel Findlay and you're listening to the Strong Mind podcast. This week's guest, Mike Weeks. I've known Mike most of my life from the Bristol climbing community. Mike was a professional climber / professional dirtbag for many years. He grew up in a council estate and dropped out of school at the age of 16. Climbing completely transformed his life. Now he is a coach and has worked with lots of people in unique and important situations, including the SAS, Marine firefighters and MMA fighters, among many other people. His previous business was Frontline Mind, helping people build resilience who are working on the front lines, such as firefighters. He spent a lot of time helping people in Haiti after the 2010 earthquake. He is the author of 2 books, Untrain Your Brain and Resilience by Design. He now lives in Bali with his wife and 2 sons and is SVP of Communication at Laconic Enterprises, an American company that is developing the world's largest organic regenerative eco-culture projects. So Mike is someone who is really into taking on lots of challenges, as you can see from that, what is a pretty selective bio. I'm sure Mike has been up to a lot of stuff that I don't know about, and I certainly didn't include everything I do know about in this bio, but those are the most important things. So Mike has a lot of interesting ideas, and this conversation was a kind of random tour of those ideas. In fact, I'd love to get Mike back on the podcast and kind of dig in a bit deeper into some of those topics and connect a few more dots. Let us know if you would like to hear more about any particular topic in our podcast community, which you can join at strongmindclimbing.com/podcast. All right, thanks so much for your time, attention, and support, and I hope you enjoy this conversation.
Faffing myself, and also I have no desire to learn how to use all this technology in the background here. But we have a we have a full-time environmental podcast now, so I need somebody knocking around.
Okay.
It prevents me from interviewing people for 90 minutes and then realising I didn't record it.
Yeah, that can happen. In fact, I'm just going to double check.
That you're
so
recording.
I'm recording on
You're
Zoom,
recording, I can see.
I'm recording on GarageBand as well.
Plus I'm recording you on the SD card, so between 3 recording points and the 2 of us, we ought to be able to come up with something at the end.
Sometimes I just put my voice memo on my iPhone as well and just put it in the background.
Just in case, yeah.
And it's often just the best audio.
Yeah, good luck publishing that. Oh, right, okay, I'll remember that next time. Where are you? You're in Bristol?
Wales. I live in North Wales.
Oh, do you? Oh, that's news. That's news to me. Which part of North Wales do you live in?
Yeah. And do you know Bryn Reffel? It's like the village at the end of the lake from Llanberis.
I do, yeah. I think...
Yeah, just there.
We had I had a friend, James, and someone who still live up there. Doesn't matter. Don't get sidetracked.
Okay, yeah. I mean, do you want to get straight to it, or do you want to chit-chat a bit and make a plan?
Don't need to chit-chat unless you want to chit-chat. I thought we were already recording, therefore all of this goes in.
No, we can chop the start if we want.
All of my preamble goes in. It's the most interesting part of every interview I conduct.
I know, yeah, it's true.
it's like posting a really beautiful image on Instagram that gets like 10 likes, and then posting something about the fact that you broke a toenail, and with a good narrative, and everyone wants to know more about your toenail. We're addicted to the mundane.
It's true. Yeah, it's totally true. Yeah, I think my most liked Instagram post is me just like bridging up my hallway to change a fire alarm battery. It's like the mundane, but like a novel way of doing the mundane, which is like the magic combo, right?
That's the magic combo, absolutely.
Yeah.
And people then see that you're human as well, that you're not superhuman.
Yeah.
Because Instagram only typically shows a lot of superhumanness. I actually like that about what you do, because you often wear your heart on the sleeve with your posts, don't you? You connect.
Yeah, I guess. I try not to put in too much personal stuff. It's a balance, I find, for sure. It's a real art doing social media, an art and a science.
I don't.
And it's also very bad for you, probably, overall.
I don't claim. So I'm the head of marketing for our business in one of my many roles, and I don't claim to understand anything about social media, other than that I don't enjoy doing it, and therefore don't really do it. I enjoy doing podcasts.
You're fairly active on social media, but I guess it's more like family and friends stuff in a way, isn't it?
Exactly. It's personal. I sort of view it as sharing my stuff with people that I've got, probably the 100 likes that I might get are all people that I recognise and know. So I may as well make the account private, but then I still have books to sell and things like that. Every copy counts.
Well, let's talk about that. I mean, I thought it'd be kind of good to just maybe give like a general overview of like who you are and where you've come from and the general bits and pieces of your career after you were a kind of a dirtbag climber for a while, right?
Kind of. I spent 10 years being a dirtbag climber. How dare you? My proudest claim of my 47 years on this planet is my decade of being a dirtbag. But then I always had ambitions to get out of the dirt, so...
Yeah, okay.
That was quite motivating.
Yeah. Well, yeah, let's hear it then. You come from Bristol, right?
Drum roll. Yeah. I always hesitate when people ask me to describe who I am or what it is that I do, because I'm not somebody who particularly likes having fixed roles or fixed identities, as you can probably see from the fact that I've done so many things over the last 30 odd years career-wise. If you spoke to my former business partners, they'd probably all say that I've got ADHD because I can't stay in a business role for more than about 4 or 5 years. But I actually think that's quite healthy because you only get one shot at life, so you may as well experience as much of it as possible. But I guess for the purpose of a podcast like this, which I assume for you is the majority of your listeners are climbers or people connected to the outdoors. As you rightly said just now, I was a dirtbag climber for about a decade. Travelled to, last count, over 50 countries, climbing all over the world. Dropped out of school when I was 16 so I could go and climb in the Bristol Avon Gorge every day. Didn't do my I finished my GCSEs so I could get my bridging allowance, which was about £30 a week. So I aspired to being one of those doley climbers and got the best of that for about a year and a half in the UK, I think, before they made it too difficult for people to be signing on whilst going to France on climbing trips. So, but climbing for me was literally the sort of path out of growing up in a little council house in a cruddy part of Bristol and without any real desire to do anything other than stay clean of a criminal record, which I think I can safely say I'm the only one in my family who doesn't have one. So I went around the world for about 10 years climbing, making the most of it, doing roped access work and even getting a few sponsorship deals here and there, making a few grand in my back pocket, living in places like Mount Arapiles for a couple of years in the town there, Natty, spending a couple of years in the US on and off, and just doing whatever I could to climb as much as possible. And then, as you probably remember, I had the strange, unexpected event of ending up making a TV show with the son of the Osbournes, Ozzy and Sharon. And how
did that come about?
Well, actually, it was from the Deepwater Solo Festival. So as you'll probably remember, I used to organise those Deepwater Solo events.
Yeah.
Down in Lulworth Cove, which they'd started out as these informal groups of a bunch of mates going climbing. And then I saw an opportunity to put a party on and get some sponsorship in. And so I did that. And then at one of the events, Leo was being filmed for that, Leo Holding, for that docu about him when he'd broken his ankle. I think it was My Right Foot, it was called. And a chap called Ed Stobart, who was a director and producer, was following Leo. And I had a chat with Ed in the pub on the night of the Deepwater Solo event. And I was just curious. I said, how are TV shows made? Because I have no idea. At that point, I was still just a climbing bum trying to make a buck from putting on events and club nights and whatever it took to just keep me on the road climbing. And Ed started telling me the process, which is pretty simple, is that people typically come in with ideas, or you have a development department. You come up with an idea, you flesh it out, and then you take it to the channel, and the channel either loves it or hates it. They might put some development money in it. They might do a sizzle, all of that sort of stuff. And so I hit him up with a couple of ideas. One of which was to take overweight kids or underprivileged kids and put them through a camp, a sort of climbing camp, and then take them up some seemingly impossible rock face like El Cap. And of course that was just my way of trying to extend my climbing career and make some money from it, from doing a bit of TV. I had actually very little desire to go and take on a group of either unfit kids or kids from underprivileged areas, although I myself came from one. And long story short, when I went to London, I had a meeting with Ed and I pitched him the idea, and then he asked me about another TV show. And on the spot, I gave him a bunch of ideas for it. The next day, he goes into Channel 4 and he gets the show commissioned based on the ideas I'd given him. And the show was called Extreme Celebrity Detox. And I was quite new agey back then. And so I was into all this weird stuff like colonic irrigation retreats and darkroom retreats in Thailand and Qigong. And I'm not saying that Qigong's weird, but and I'm sure colonic irrigation is just fine for some people. But back then I was obsessed by anything novel and new and anything that could make me live forever or climb a little bit harder. So Ed, like 3 days after it was commissioned, calls me. I was in Bristol and he said, "Oi, you know that those ideas you gave us for that TV show?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "I can't find anything about it online." I'm doing an impression of Ed, and if anyone's ever met him, they'll know it's a good impression. And I said, "Well, that's because it's an inner circle thing, Ed. The Qigong in the mountains of Slovenia is my mate, and the person who takes people to drink pee in the Himalayas is I know him." And anyway, he said, "Do you want to be a producer, associate producer on a TV show?" Well, at this point, I'd barely ever sent an email, didn't know how to turn a computer on. And my life had been mostly spent in the back of rusty old cars and in campsites. So I said yes, jumped at the chance, and ended up like a new kid at school, turning up on Monday morning in Golden Square to the Virgin Radio building where Ginger Productions was. And then I ended up producing this TV show. One of the stars on that show, if you're going to use that term, one of the celebrities was Jack Osbourne. And we took him climbing in the mountains for that show. And then one evening, sat around the campfire, the angels hit me with inspiration. And I said, "Jack, do you want to climb El Cap? And do you want to make a TV show showing the journey?" And so the long and short of it was, the funny part of it all was that Jack said, "Well, you have to convince my mum and dad." So a week later, we were my wife, then girlfriend, Bean, and I are on a plane to LA to go and convince Ozzy and Sharon that we wouldn't kill their son if we took him around the world for 6 months, training him up. And bear in mind, at that point, he was 17 stone. He was a heifer.
Right, so what's that in kilos? That's...
Oh, God, I don't know. Well, I'm 94 kilos, which is
probably
about
like 130 kilos or something, is it?
Something like that. Too heavy to be a climber. But actually, Jack's got really good footwork and delicate, and it's quite a delicate climber. Very technical, but just... And so
instead of like overweight, underprivileged kids, you just had a slightly overweight, very privileged kid.
Yeah. And he would listen. Jack's like family to me. He's like my little brother. We're very, very close. We've remained very, very close. And he'd be the first to admit all of that. He'd say, sometimes we'll sit around now and he'll go, "Dude, can you believe what a pissing, whining little slob I was when we had that show?" But the problem was he'd come from making the Osbournes, where they paid him a vast fortune to just hang out in LA. And then all of a sudden, he's being paid a lot of money for us as climbers, but for him, it's just a wage. To then have his ass kicked every single day by this admittedly, meaning me, totally over-keen dictator trainer, because I've told everyone I'm going to get his ass up El Cap no matter what, even if I have to drag him up it dead. And so I was viciously dictatorial on him, making him get up at 7 a.m. And I think the earliest he'd got up before that was midday. So anyway, the odd thing was going to LA and then all of a sudden being invited to stay in the house with Ozzy and Sharon for 2 weeks as they got to know us. And I mean, I had these wonderful memories of sitting down for a cup of tea with just me and Ozzy in his TV room, watching the World War II documentaries and just chatting to Ozzy Osbourne. And luckily for me, I wasn't a rock fan. I didn't even know who he was before I'd been told to get Jack.
Okay, yeah.
So I didn't have I didn't have this sort of fan thing going on. But it was a very odd experience. And then we obviously spent 9 months on the road and got Jack up El Cap and 5 series of it. And Jack became a climber and it changed his life.
That's cool.
So
Can you still watch those? Are they on YouTube or something?
I have absolutely no idea. I'm terrified to even look for it because I don't want to see what I looked like 15 years ago. It will horrify me, the things I'll be saying and doing. I know I was really mean to him, which also the directors obviously amplified. My good friend Craig Pickles.
Yeah, no, that's what they want, isn't it? They want that drama.
That. So, but I've got completely sidetracked in that story. But to answer your question, sort of background on me. So I then became, on the back of that, I got all these people asking me if I would coach them in London. And so
I didn't realise that was the link for how you became a coach.
Yeah.
I thought you just wanted to become a coach.
No, I just wanted to be a climbing bum forever. I mean, I didn't, right? I wanted to work in TV. I can't
imagine you doing that.
No, but I wanted to be on screen and I wanted to use my dazzling good looks and all of that kind of stuff and not realising that I actually wasn't very good on screen, in truth. I've watched some of the stuff we did on extreme archaeology and it's awful. Oh, it's awful. So I ended up starting to coach people and sort of charging them the kind of rates that I would charge an A-list celebrity. And then I spent 10 years in London, 9 years, working as a coach. And then I had no coaching skills formal. So I went and did all these different coaching courses, executive coach, business coaching courses. But I also went and did NLP. And that's where I met my mentor, John Grinder. And I know you wanted to talk about NLP. And I got really lucky that John Grinder, the co-developer of NLP, so the co-creator, he's really the brains behind it. I mean, he was a professor of linguistics. He's one of the youngest ever professors at MIT. He'd spent a number of years working as a spy for the US Special Forces and intelligence agencies behind the Berlin Wall. Just an incredible man, speaks 9 languages And so on the first day that he was in the room teaching, I didn't actually know who he was because my girlfriend had dragged me along to the course. And he started using a climbing metaphor and I challenged him on it because I didn't really understand anything that was going on in this NLP program. But I understood what he was talking about in climbing. So I challenged him on it. He challenged me back. And then he said, let's go climbing on our day off. And everyone in the room, was about 150 people had flown in from all over the world to see this man. They all looked at me like, oh. And I went, oh, God, I've got to take some old dude climbing. Anyway, we went climbing on our day off, and it was incredible. I thought he was in his 50s or something. It turned out he was nearly 70. And we went to the Avon Gorge from London, and I took him up pitch 1 and pitch 2 of New Horizons on the ramp. And he got up both pitches with...
That's E3, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it is, yeah.
Yeah.
So I took him up that.
Proper climber.
He can climb. Yeah, he can absolutely climb.
Right. Oh, cool.
And then to cut, to the chase, it changed my life because all of a sudden he became like a sort of mentor and father figure, and I spent 9 years coaching with him, spotting me in the background, on me being on lead and him having me on belay metaphorically and also at times literally. So that's how I ended up coaching. I did that for a number of years, and then I've, over that process, coached everything from champion MMA fighters to lots of different professional athletes, and done work with the UK SAS, worked specifically for 8 weeks on projects with them. I've worked with the US Marine Corps, revolutionizing some of their recon marine training for pool survivability. Firefighting groups, teams, frontline agencies. So our company used to be called Frontline Mind. The company is still called that, but I'm not a part of it anymore. And so here I am now.
You don't have Frontline Mind anymore?
No, I'm not a part of that. I left a year and a half ago to be a part of a new company that is an environmental focused company. We're based in Chicago, but I run the office here in Bali, and we do large scale regenerative agriculture and also environmental intelligence, which is essentially scanning the environment to understand what the hell's going on in it so that we can tell governments you need to fix this now before it gets out of hand, like pollution and soil depletions and water acidity and the likes. So that's what I do now. Somebody in the background, come in, join us.
Yeah.
It's one big happy party.
Angus, you can come say hi if you want.
Is that your partner?
Yeah, he's forgotten I'm podcasting.
Right, that's all right.
Oh, that's cool. Before we get too sidetracked, can we just go back to NLP? Because I think it's a fairly contentious area, isn't it, NLP?
Yeah.
And I'm really not an expert at all. I've never done a course in NLP. I kind of know roughly what it is, but maybe just explain to the audience what it is, what's your experience of it as an NLP practitioner, and just give us your take.
Yeah. So I absolutely have a very strong cognitive bias in support of it, from the fact that for me it literally, you can hear all this kind of bullshitty American high five, punch the air, Tony Robbins crap. I'm not a fan of Tony Robbins, and I'm not a fan of the way he uses NLP. Or what's the bloke who sells books and saying I can make you thin in the UK? More Paul McKenna. So Paul McKenna's like some best-selling author, also an NLP type person. I mention those names because they're in my opinion, and I'm not scared of naming these people, they're everything that's wrong about it. And that is these over-the-top claims that link the process to them as individuals. It's creating a kind of guru-like figure around a bunch of patterns that already exist in the world, and that what NLP has done is essentially it's a coding model. So the original process that went on was that John and a guy called Richard Bandler, who is a pretty unpleasant person, and another guy called what's his name? I went and spent 2 weeks with him in the Ukraine. It'll come to me in a sec anyway. Oh, Frank Pusalik. So anyway, they found all the best guys and women in the therapeutic world. And then they had this assumption that they could go and model them, essentially copying their work, and get rid of all of the waffle and get straight to the juice of it. So this is like a world-class climber saying to a beginner, well, you have to do this, and you have to do that, and you have to do this, and you have to do that, and you have to do this, and you have to do that. And the climb's only a very straightforward 5-5 slab where you just have to put your hands and feet in front of each other. You don't have to do a drop knee. You don't have to do this. You don't have to don't have to run your breathing patterns. And so they did a very, very good job, seemingly, of modeling the patterns of these world-class experts at the time in therapy. And that is, and then they coded those patterns. So they lived them long enough that they could make sure that they could validate them. And then they coded them and turned them into these processes. So that's what NLP is. NLP is actually a modeling process. It's spending time around people, and I've done a lot of this, to identify the unconscious patterns that make those people good. NLP is no different in its core than doing an apprenticeship, except in an apprenticeship, what happens is that you also buy into all of the beliefs and the values and the assumptions of the person you're modeling, right? So if I tell people, if I have an apprentice in climbing and I tell them that you absolutely must do X and you must do Y, you must say a little prayer before you climb every time. Well, that's not process driven, that's belief driven, right? And so
it's also not taking into account personal differences.
Correct. Now, what NLP did very, very well, a lot of people say NLP sucked the soul out of a lot of the processes that they were modeling or rather out of the methodologies. And that's actually, in many ways, it's true, because what it went to is just pure process. Like, what are the steps that lead to the outcome? Let's make it as mechanical and methodical as possible. How do you get...
Can you give an example of what that might look like if you were coaching someone using NLP?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing is you're never going to ever get any kind of effect in a change process unless you have rapport with the person, right? Now,
yeah, so the first rule of coaching, right?
It's the first rule of coaching, you have to have rapport. So if you speak to non-NLP focused practitioners who talk about rapport, they'll talk about things like having things in common and finding a mutual ground and being curious about the other person, which actually can be very useful. But those are content impositions, right? So you're imposing on them the idea of the process of rapport, the fact that you need to be curious about a person, or you need to share beliefs, or you need to find middle ground or value, or they need to like you. That's one of the biggest misunderstandings. I've had deep rapport with people who can't stand me. And I've had a lot of coaching clients who can't stand me, who've had incredible outcomes, because my job's not to be liked, it's to provoke change.
Yeah.
And we can talk about that a bit later. But so the difference between a content approach, which is where I say, look, it's, to get good rapport, you have to have something in common. That's bullshit. The NLP approach is to look at the patterns that happen below the level of content. And in the case of rapport, it turns out that probably because of the mirror neurons in the brain, the mirror neurons are these area of the brain that mammals have that enable us to replicate the movement patterns of those around us at a very young age. So the mirror neurons are they're not mostly active, but they're most active from the day we're born until about 6-7 years old. They're probably the biggest finding in neuroscience in the last 100 years. They were found in...
There's sort of theories around empathy and mirror neurons.
Absolutely.
And stuff, isn't there?
Absolutely, yep. And this is where the soul gets sucked out of it all, right? It's nice to think that empathy is some element that comes with something of good and evil in the world, where we empathize because we're good people. In reality, it's some neurological process that enables us to survive, to bond, to be able to learn how to hunt and to move and to run and to jump and to make, babies and reproduce and all that stuff. So in the NLP process of getting rapport, to stay on track, what you notice when you're looking at the pattern is that when people are in rapport, they have a mirroring effect in their non-verbals, what people would call body language. I don't like that word because it's not language. Language is purely linguistic. It's body communication. Let's call it non-verbals because there's no verbalness to it. So if you see two people arguing, they're typically in deep rapport because they're both pointing the fingers at each other. They're both red, spitting in the face. They're beautiful, exquisite, deep rapport. Right. If you see two people at a table on their phones, and one has got his arms crossed and is looking one way, and the partner, be it he or a she, is nibbling their food and on their phone, they're probably not in rapport. They're not showing any kind of flow, ebb and flow in the movement. If we go back a bazillion years and we think about how the mirror neurons would work in a small tribe of people, where the young have to model the old so that they can stay alive, they're probably replicating so many of the movement patterns. When the person at the front of the hunting party stops and sniffs the air, the teenager or the child is going to probably do the same. And this is how they learn, and especially pre-language. I mean, language is such a recent addition to our skill set. So what NLP has gone to, it's sucked the soul out of life, and it's gone straight to the process. Now, this is good because you can put whatever soul into it you want. You can add whatever meaning you want. So this is pure process. It's looking at how do you get rapport with somebody. Well, you can get rapport with somebody without being curious about them, without sharing anything, any interests, without sharing any degree of similarity, just by matching and mirroring at the very slightest movement, so you don't look like a robotic idiot. Matching and mirroring their breathing, their eye movements, their bodily movements and postures. And you know what? This was poo-pooed for decades, even though it works. And there's a whole bunch of studies. As you'll see in our book, Resilience by Design, we don't mention NLP once. We mention John Grinder, and we mention his massive contribution to everything in the world of pretty much effective approaches to change work. But so much of what those guys found in the 70s and 80s through actual trial and error and modelling has been shown again and again now in the research to be valid. Even the eye patterning stuff, where you can get a sense of how a person is creating their world through the way that their eyes move. And all of this is being validated now. And now it comes out in research papers and people go, hallelujah, we found this new piece of information that when people lie, their eye patterns go in a certain way. And when people are being authentic and when they empathize, well, that stuff's been known for about 40 years. And who knows, maybe it was known hundreds and thousands of years ago and people just have not managed to pass it on through, written documents and likes. So that's...
I guess it's like they've systemized it, haven't they?
NLP is a systematic approach to human behavior, right? So you can't claim... Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, that's not all of it though, right? Because there's also the sort of what you actually say to people, the sort of the linguistic programming part. So what does that part look like?
Yeah, but the name NLP, I mean, I struggle to even... So John himself thought for many years about just putting a public declaration out saying, I made it all up, it's bullshit. Just to scatter all the people who... Yeah,
because it's just a collection of tools, right? And
correct.
Yeah. Okay.
It's a collection of tools, but let's not undermine it. So because Grinder, as a linguist, also created the meta model, which is a linguistic process that is arguably the only process of its kind, with the exception of something called clean language, which was also developed by two very good psychotherapists. But the meta model is, I don't know how people live without it, because it is a linguistic set of patterns that enable you to identify where you are running unuseful beliefs and where you're running unuseful assumptions and generalizations and distortions. My 10-year-old and my 7-year-old have the meta model deeply ingrained in their linguistic patterning, and they'll call dad up if I generalize. I mean, I've been together with my partner 21 years, and I guarantee that if I had not had the linguistic capabilities that I have learned from John Grinder and the NLP process of the meta model, we wouldn't be together, because I'd be, well, you always do this, and you don't care about me, and all the normal typical bullshit that goes on in poor communication. So the process of the meta model, which really, it's a shame it's even attached to NLP, because it should be a standalone that Grinder wins accolades all over the world for, because it's absolutely exquisite in cleaning up communication. It gets rid of all of the unuseful linguistic patterns that cause tension and contention and confusion.
Mm-hmm. The CBT does that too, right? Helps you identify these sort of unuseful modes of thinking, sort of like generalization.
Yeah, but they've just nicked it.
Models use that too, right?
Yeah, but they've just nicked it, and they've nicked it. They've hijacked it, and they've done it poorly. So having somebody like Grinder as a mentor is terrifying, because he's like that Zen master, metaphorical Zen master, who will whack you over the head with a bamboo cane if you're not absolutely focused and clean and precise on point. And so my former business partner, good mate, Ian Snape, who's an academic, he's a PhD, he's a geochemist, he's run over 300 PhDs in his career. He used to be the head scientist for the Australian Antarctic division. He's run dozens and dozens of scientific studies. So he's a hardcore scientist. No bullshit. Which is why our book has over 600 references in it. If I'd have written it, I'd have had 2, as it was.
John Grinder, and
exactly.
then John Grinder again.
Exactly. No, but as it happens, I had to, to write that book. I spent a year reading papers because Ian enforced it on me, and so now I actually get it. Back then, lazy thinking, you don't need to back it up. But look, Ian's a hardcore scientist, and we know a whole bunch of other hardcore scientists who even though there may not be these grand academic supporting mechanisms for something like NLP, although there is in Germany, where it's used therapeutically on the equivalent of the NHS. The system, it's used in psychotherapy there, but you have to be licensed to use it, which has its pros and cons. But even with all of the, the top academics that actually utilize it and apply it, just because there aren't lots of papers, and there are some, it doesn't mean it's not valid. It's like saying there's not a paper for how to efficiently pick your nose or wipe your backside, but you know the best way to do it, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's psychology in general, isn't it? I mean, for most interventions that are like typically accepted as being beneficial, there's not really great research behind them. I mean, CBT, mindfulness, there's papers that say that they work, there's papers that say they don't work, but there's also papers that say even though we know that there's positive outcomes, we still don't know what the actual like mechanism is. Like CBT, people don't, they've not been able to separate just the actual like conversational space, like working with someone who cares and doesn't judge you. I mean, that already is like highly therapeutic, isn't it?
Massively. And so going back to what we said about rapport, you can't make any change. So I'm falling off my stool here because I've got 2 cushions on it. You can't make any change without rapport, right? Whether it doesn't matter if the person likes you or not. But I have actually experimented with clients who weren't paying, with people that I was doing sort of pro bono for, just helping out. And so I've experimented with getting deep rapport with them and then doing everything the wrong way round. So turning the process that is a coded process upside down, or doing it in parts and not completing it. And I've done that intentionally to see what's happened. And in a majority of the cases, I've had people say that it's fixed the problem. Now, so this leads into the idea of the psychosomaticness and mind body, and also things like placebo, right? The placebo is still, right now, one of the most effective approaches to curing a whole range of what we would call actual physiological problems. I as you know, I have a problem with all of the mind-body split, and
we can talk about that.
We'll get into that, yeah. But the placebo is more effective than pretty much any of the medicines out there, maybe with the exception of something like aspirin that's had 120 years of, validity, or antibiotics and the likes. But nobody, it seems, it's not true. There's a few people like Dr. John Sarno, who wrote The Divided Mind. The majority of medical practitioners, they don't want to actually understand why the placebo works or how it works. They only want to know that they go, that's a placebo effect. But they don't want to understand how the reorganization of your cells can cause a spontaneous healing. That's not me being Tony Robbins-like. There are gazillions of cases, of documented cases of having spontaneous healing, whether it's cancer, and I've seen some. I'm not talking like Hallelujah, where somebody jumps out of a wheelchair and starts walking, but over time, that people who've been told they're going to die from cancer or stage 3, etc., and they get better, right? And they confuse the medicos, but the medicos, because it doesn't fit in their dogmatic model that they've been trained to understand that if you have this, then you're going to die. And they typically use a crystal ball, and then they put that curse upon the patient. Rather than saying, 80% of our patients, no, let's say 90% or 95% of our patients who come in with this stage 3 malignant cancer, unless they have chemo, they don't walk out again, they die, right? Or whatever the statistic is. But rather than saying, but there's this 5% who are anomalies, or 2% who come in, they have, it's not like we haven't done the radiography correctly. We know that they had massive tumours. They haven't taken the treatment and they haven't died. And 2-3 years later, they've done something else. That's where we should be studying. We shouldn't be saying they're an anomaly. We should be going, what the fuck did you do? Right? Those are the people we should be modelling. We should go, I want to know everything about your beliefs, your values, your lifestyle changes. I don't actually care about what you ate, even. I care more about what happened internally to reorganise this problem. So I obviously have a deep contempt for reductionism and medical black magic, which is casting spells on people by giving them by stating that they have X, and you'll have to suffer for this amount of time for this amount of symptoms before X either kills you or you recover, but only with these magic pills that we're going to give you, which typically, has had some fudged research in the background. Don't get me wrong. If I get an infection here in Bali, I take antibiotics, right?
Yeah.
But
yeah.
Anyway, we're getting sidetracked.
Yeah, okay. I mean, we were talking about NLP.
Yeah, so you're asking me about NLP, yeah.
Yeah, the linguistic part.
But it's all linked. Well, no, I think I've moved on from the linguistic part. I mean, it is deeply effective. The reason I mentioned Tony Robbins and the other dude whose name skips me again, the hypnotist, Paul McKenna, is because saying, what do you think of NLP is a bit like saying, what do you think of good quality food ingredients? So if I give good quality food ingredients to somebody who is a master chef and they know how to balance the flavors and the textures and the aromas and even the visuals of them on a plate, you get a memorable, maybe even if food's your thing, transformative experience. Mm-hmm. If you give it to somebody who thinks that they can cook but has never actually had much experience or lessons, and they actually have pretty dud taste buds, and they take those same ingredients, you're going to get something that is it might still be able to provide nutrients to you, but it's not going to be something that actually has a memorable effect. I doubt it's going to be transformative, if food ever really is that much. But the analogy here is that the NLP is like a set of tools that if you're not very good at applying them, then you're not really going to have consistent effects and benefits from utilizing them. It's all about the practitioner at a certain level, so you hear some people say, like, NLP worked on me, but it kind of worked in the sense that the change I wanted to see happened, but I didn't really grow as a person or build resilience in other ways, or it was almost like a trick. The practitioner kind of tricked me into doing the thing that I wanted to do or feel the way I wanted to feel, but it wasn't like a journey for me. I've heard people say that. What would you say to that? Well, so the problem or the challenge with me to reply to that, of course, is that we're talking a generalization here. One of I think the most important aspects of being a coach or any kind of change agent is the understanding that you're dealing with an individual who has absolutely unique needs. Their patterns, their belief patterns, their values, how they live their life, how they perceive themselves, those are all absolutely unique. They might be shared to some degree on some level, but they're unique. And so it's impossible to generalize about this, these people. What I would say is that if you are expecting your life to be magically transformed by somebody else by having 3 or 4 coaching sessions, then you are dreaming. If, however, you have a phobia of flying, or you need to improve your climbing grade to get, and because you've got too much tension around falling, or something that is a none of these events are isolated from your life, because you can't isolate anything from your life. But something that is a clear outcome in a context. Remember, all behavior is contextual, right? How you behave at the crag is very different, especially in a public crag when people are around. It's like, oh, look, it's Hazel Findlay, she's famous. It's very different to how you behave in a pub or in the house with your partner, or you're in a pub with your close mates, or if you're in a coaching context with somebody, you're behaving much differently to how you would if you're hanging out with my kids here. So behavior is contextual. Context constrains, and it also triggers unconsciously our states. So if you think about it, the conscious mind is obviously taking in and processing a few bits of information. The unconscious is taking in a lot. This is how we can ensure that we stay safe in an environment where so much is going on. We can't process that information like all of the time, because our attention would never be on the individual task. But when I'm over here making a fire, I also want to be alert unconsciously to any prowling predator that might be coming through the forest. Now in indigenous people, go ahead.
It's just making me think of hemisphere stuff.
Yeah, well, we can get onto the hemispheres. We can lead into this. So you've got the conscious and you've got the unconscious, and it's really important to be able to enact a balance between the two. So what's happening now in the modern world, and you've brought up the hemispheres, is that the left hemispheres seem to hijack the right. The right has, for the majority of the history of our evolution, has probably been the main operating hemisphere. Now, it's not true that they operate separately. They're always operating in conjunction. And there's even, obviously, there's neurons not just in the hemisphere. There's neurons in the gut and there's neurons in the heart. There's 86 billion allegedly neurons, I have never counted, in the brain, head brain, and then there's 2 to 500 million neurons in the enteric brain, which is the gut. And then you've got about, I think it's 50 or 100, between 50 and 120,000 in 120,000 neurons in the brain. In the heart. So you've got neurons all over us. So it's not true that you just have a left and a right working independently, but they do dominate. And if you look at somebody if you ask somebody if they want to go for lunch, and they look at their watch and they say, well, it's not 1 o'clock yet, which is lunchtime. You're probably speaking to somebody who's dominated by their left hemisphere, and they're not in touch with the right hemisphere, which tells you when you're hungry. To go and eat is something you do when you're hungry. It's not something you do at 1 o'clock. So we have this, the left hemisphere creates a slight roboticness. It's the function that really compresses information, and it categorizes, it reduces, and it takes complexity and it puts it into little pieces. Whereas the right hemisphere is taking everything in at all times, and it acts in symbolism, and it acts in sensation, and it acts in feeling. And the problem is that we as a species have evolved mostly with a dominance of the right, but in the last couple of thousand years, the left has really taken over. And that's enabled us to build cathedrals and write books and computer programs and send people to the moon, of course. But there's an absolute necessity for a balance between the two. The intuition comes from the right hemisphere. How many children are told from an early age to not follow their intuitive signals? And later on, the young lady who's been told to think logically about everything has walked down an alleyway that her gut told her not to, but she doesn't listen to it, and she's been mugged. So our intuitive system is much, much older than the left hemisphere and the categorization system. And I think it befalls us to start supporting right hemispheric, more intuitive learning and appreciation in schools, but it's just not done. You sit down and you're told to use your left hemisphere for pretty much everything. Intuition doesn't come into play. Well, good luck living in a complex and often dangerous world with just the left hemisphere. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, go on.
No, I was going to say I have no idea what I was talking about at the outset of that outpouring.
I think there was a question that didn't get answered in there about NLP.
Yeah. I think I'm moving on from NLP because I'm sort of bored of talking about NLP.
Totally.
Right. Go and try it. If it works for you, great. If it doesn't, go and find somebody else who's really good at it. But go on a John Grinder course if you can, because he's the master of it.
Okay, cool. What is there any link between hemisphere stuff and NLP?
Well, is there any link between the brain and NLP? So yes, there is.
Yeah, but
absolutely.
I mean, like, when people have kind of, studied NLP or created NLP or anything like that, have those same people also thought about hemisphere difference, or have they just been thinking about intuition and unconscious processes?
Well, the only reason I was ever know anything about the hemispheres, and it's something that we spent a lot of time, Ian and I, studying and making sure that we had a relatively robust understanding of for our book. But the reason was because John Grinder put me onto The Master and His Emissary, which is Ian McGilchrist's book, and he said it was the best book he'd probably ever read. And Grinder doesn't really read many books anymore. And so it took me 2 years to get through The Master and His Emissary in sections.
I'm partway through.
Yeah.
It's massive. I read his shorter book, which I think is actually, it's a good place to start. Can't remember what it's called now. Is it just The Divided Brain or?
No, Divided Brain is John Sarno. I don't know what the other book is. I've only ever read McGilchrist's The Master and His Emissary.
Unless I'm getting confused and I've read John Sarno's
I think
book
you're talking John Sarno. So McGilchrist's book is obviously, it studies art and philosophy and literature and architecture as a pathway of a sort of map of how the left hemisphere has evolved. Once upon a time when we lived in the forests and we had to be mostly right hemisphere dominant because there was risks there, and because we had to know where we were going to find food and what we were smelling and what we were hearing and tracking and all of that stuff, that requires the ability to live in a full system. And you can use the left for a very specific task, but you have to have the right running in the background to make sure that that you stay alive and that you survive. And so over the history of sort of the written and the visual history of mankind, you can see this dominance of the left coming in to the point now where many people, I mean, a coder would be in a perfect example, will probably sit there for 8 hours, not ignoring every signal that they need a piss, that they need lunch, that they're tired, right? That they need company because they're lonely, and they just sit there, or a computer gamer just playing, blah, blah, just coding and categorizing, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Just to say, so that I found out the book that is shorter and I think is a good introduction to this is called The Divided Brain and the Search for Meaning by McGilchrist. I don't know about the other book.
Yeah, that's The Divided Brain. The Divided Mind was the one I was talking about, John Sarno. That's all about.
Is that also really good?
It is, but it's all about what you'd call psychosomatic illnesses and diseases, and
right.
Sarno's. I don't want to condense it too much, but Sarno's view is that the majority of illnesses are just an expression of emotions, or what I would call states, that are playing out because it's better to play out in an illness that shuts down those emotions rather than run those emotions for too long. So an example, if you're somebody who's just angry all the time, you are going to burn out because anger produces a huge amount of adrenaline and catecholamines and a cortisol and the likes. And so it's almost better, it's like a survival response, to shut the anger down with something that is a symptom that takes your mind off the anger, like a skin rash or an eczema and this isn't some quack. The guy spent his entire life both treating patients in this way, back pain and the likes being, a very common one, but also doing huge amounts of research across the board. There's another book, fantastic one. I'll dig it out later. I can't remember the name of it, but it's a orthopedic surgeon who basically said that the surgery, about 80%, 90% of the time, is actually just a placebo effect, and they know that from all of the surgeries that went wrong and people got better. They cut the wrong ligament, they put the wrong disc back in, and people got better.
And that's what's interesting about chronic pain as well, which I know a little bit about, having suffered from chronic pain in my shoulder. And how the pain that you feel in your mind, like often just does not correlate to what's actually happening in the tissues. Obviously, if you get stabbed, then. But even if you get stabbed, if your adrenaline's high enough and it's in your interest to not feel that pain, like if you're in a war zone or something, you might just not even feel it.
Stabbing's an interesting one. So historically, if you can read about all sorts of different people who've been stabbed multiple times in battles and who have later gone on to their next battle and their next battle, and they've lived, right? There's multiple stabbings. There's actually a film with Tom Hardy in where he gets shot and stabbed and in the end he gets shot and stabbed so many times, and it's a true story based on these brothers who were moonshine. They produce moonshine. I can't remember the name of the film, but he ends up dying from pneumonia because he falls in a lake at the end of all of this, right? But he'd been shot and stabbed so many times. Nowadays, if somebody gets shot and stabbed, we're so hypersensitive to the shock of something like that because we live in a much more civilized society. People die from a small stabbing because they die from the shock of it, because unconsciously they've not been prepared to be stabbed. If you're walking down the street and you get attacked and you get stabbed, the shock is probably what's going to kill you, not the... No, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying stabbings are...
I mean, if you go through like a femoral artery or something...
Of course. But the point I'm trying to make here is that, again, context and training, like the brain is sort of enacted upon by the environment, right? So we form our thinking from the environments that we grow up in. If you grow up in a warrior environment where a few spear wounds here and there, or an arrow wound, is just part of the daily ritual of being a warrior who fights the tribe, it's not going to affect you. In fact, it might even be something that you wear as a badge of honor, as long as it's not hit you in a femoral artery or in one of your organs. But if you grew up in a civilized society like we do, semi-civilized, where you assume that any kind of stab wound is going to kill you, that shock is going to be, even if it's not going to kill you, the shock of it is probably going to cause a lot more damage than it would to the warrior caste. The point I'm making here is that our perception, in the same way that you're talking about your shoulder, our perception drives our bodily experiences because there's no mind and body split. Mind is embodied.
Yeah.
Right? Mind is in your shoulder. Mind is in your heart with those neurons. Yeah. It's in your gut. It's not just up here. I really reject every time people say, it's all in your head. Well, so fear is in your head. Show me where you feel the fear in your head. Because that's the last place I've ever experienced fear. I experience it in my gut. I experience it in my calves. I experience it in my toes. I experience a copper taste at the back of my throat when I think I'm going to fall off and die.
My scalp starts to prickle.
Does it?
So actually, I do feel it in my head.
No, you don't feel it in. You feel it on the surface.
On the scalp is where I feel it. Yeah.
So this idea.
But the thing is, it's language, isn't it? And how important should we shift our language to more accurate? I mean, some of our language, though, does betray the fact that our mind is embodied. For example, like, I've got butterflies in my stomach. We don't say, I'm thinking I'm nervous. You describe the sensation of nerves, right? So some of our language kind of betrays that.
You're absolutely right. Those metaphors typically express a more embodied experience.
From the right hemisphere.
Because they're expressing from the right hemisphere. Exactly.
Yeah.
There's a fascinating study that Ian did, my former business partner, who's a scientist, where they got a bunch of Taekwondo experts. Ian trained the Olympic Taekwondo team of Australia and works very closely with the bunch of gold medalists, former gold medal. Well, they're all former, aren't they? Gold medalists. And they got one group they got everyone to kick pads for as long as they could until exhaustion, and then they tested their recovery time, right, before they could then go again, and then note what the second round was. They then did they did a kind of clean the slate. I think they maybe came back another time. And then the same group of people, they split. And one group of Taekwondo experts were told they would do exactly the same. the next group were asked to come up with a metaphor that would represent their ability to recover really fast. So they might say, well, when I'm recovering fast at my best, I'm like molten lava, or I'm like, no, it has to be it has to be cleanly elicited. You cannot impose it. Anytime you have people imposing metaphors on you, like, I want you to think that you're a steam train running through that's just, that's worse than nothing.
Visualization and coaching, where
agreed.
people get you to imagine things. I'm like, I can't imagine that.
No, exactly. And also you're imposing their content on you. It's not process driven. So they get the other group of Taekwondo experts to come up with a metaphor that represents their ability to recover really fast. And that might be something absurd. They might come up with the idea of being a kangaroo. They might come up, they might use a fruit. And I say that both of those because I've used it with MMA fighters. And one of the toughest guys I've ever met in my life said, when I'm recovering at my best, I'm like a watermelon. Right. So I don't crack up at this. This is his metaphor. This is his unconscious expressing a symbol that represents to him recovery. Now, it might be that it's a juicy, sweet recovery, something, but I don't need to know why, and I certainly would never challenge it. That's his metaphor. So you then get the Taekwondo groups to then kick to exhaustion again, and during the break of the exhaustion, the group with the metaphor is asked to activate the metaphor. So they go into and they embody what it would be like to be the watermelon or the lava or the kangaroo or who knows what. And then they kick again and they get about a 30% longer ability to kick. Because you've created an unconscious connection to recovery, whatever, through a metaphor. This has activated the right hemisphere and all of the embodied expression of it, or the embodied systems, in fact. So I really reject. I mean, I go out of my way. Anytime my kids have picked up from their friends or people around them where they go, Dad, they're into competitive Brazilian jiu-jitsu and surfing, and Dad, it's a head game, and I'm just like, no, it's not. Like, let's come over here. Where do you notice it? Well, Dad, it's in my stomach. What? Okay, so how's that a head game? Thinking is embodied, and I think that the number one thing we could do for the health of people is to break this Cartesian dualism, Descartes being the original source of the idea of a mind and body, where we assume that the two are separate. If you think that eating whatever your version of healthy food and doing exercise is going to keep you healthy, but you're walking around feeling miserable or resenting people or living in jealousy or angry about the state of the world all of the time, and if you think that broccoli and that fish is going to protect you from illness, good luck, because that's 15 minutes of providing nutrients to your body versus carrying around states, what people call emotions, all day long that are triggering a whole cataclysm of neurotransmitters and stress hormones and the likes. So we need to clean up our thinking.
How deep do you think that non-dualism goes? Because non-dualism can be, there's obviously a difference between my consciousness, like how the world feels to me in this moment, like my conscious experience, and what we assume is the material world. That there is a difference between those two things. But what you're saying is that mind isn't just in the head. How we approach things like health or performance or transformations in life can't just be thought of as some change that's happening in the brain, or something that we can think of as some change that's happening in the body. Do you see what I'm saying? It's almost like there's two types of dualism going on there. There's like two conceptualizations of dualism.
Well, so to answer your first one, and correct me if I'm wrong, you're stating that your version of reality is not absolute reality, right? So what you experience is not what is the absolute reality around you. Is that what you were stating?
Well, it's my absolute reality, isn't it? Like all I have is my consciousness.
No, it's your reality. It's not absolute reality. Absolute reality is the one that none of us will ever know. Because it
but we
exists
assume it's there because we do scientific tests and stuff like that. But you might find people arguing, and this is what Cartesian dualism, like in philosophy, the questions are posed. The whole brain and the vat thing, right? Like, how do we not know that we're not just in a simulation?
We don't.
Yeah, we don't.
So then fitness beats reality, meaning. So I'm not a religious person. In fact, quite the opposite. I am somebody who has as little beliefs as possible, because I know beliefs are made up. A belief, as you'll know, is a imposing of meaning on an event before it's actually happened. Otherwise, it's called a fact. But even facts end up becoming more like beliefs over time. Karl Popov, the scientist and genius, said that, and no one's ever been able to challenge this view, is that you can't prove anything in science, because all you'll end up is having endless extensions of what you proved by the next round of proof. You can only disprove it. You can disprove something. I can't prove that there's no God, and I can't disprove that there's no God. So therefore, I have to live as a complete agnostic, and I'm okay with that because I don't care whether there's a God or not. Right, it has nothing to do with me. It's like not my business. I got way too much to be getting on with every day as a father and a husband and a dog owner of 7 stray dogs that we've rescued and all of that. Right, I know. I'm like one of those weird cat people now. So we can't know absolute reality. We can only figure out what works best. What's the best fit in reality? Now, I don't jump off of buildings or let go when free soloing, because I know that absolute reality involves something called gravity. It doesn't matter how much I try to convince myself through perception that I am not connected to this thing called gravity. I can prove it once and for all very quickly. Well, I can do it by jumping off a 2-foot rock, right, which is about the height with my knees these days at 47 years old is probably about enough. There was a time when 30 foot seemed fine. So absolute reality exists there. None of us will ever know. Maybe that's what the Buddhists find when they sit and meditate for 30 years, or the Zen monks. Maybe they touch on absolute reality. Maybe that's where they see the matrix.
They do say that they feel the atoms, don't they?
Yeah. Exactly, yeah, and maybe that's what's happening when you get the mind out of the way, and all of the expressions of like or dislike or good or bad, or all of this categorization and all of that. I actually think that what they're doing is they're just training a dominance of the right hemisphere, so that they go into this deep embodied experience. But I've never had the experience of enlightenment, so I don't know. Now, I've taken lots of ayahuasca in the jungles of Peru, and I've experienced what felt like a complete and utter fracturing of my consciousness, dying and all of a sudden coming out in a white cloud surrounded by pure bliss. But I was on one of the world's strongest hallucinogens, so it's not a valid experience in my book. It was a valid experience, but it's not valid to be able to say that, I met God. So we can't know absolute reality, I assume. We can only do our best in reality, right? And working within the constraints of what we know. So, if we could limit the dogmatic views and beliefs in the world, we would end up getting rid of all the isms, racisms, sexisms, and on, because they're all based on this left hemisphere, not right hemisphere, this left hemispheric view of categorization. And so is the idea of mind and body. It is the left hemisphere's approach to try and say, look, I've got an arm, right? Now I can say it's an arm, but where does the arm actually stop and the rest of the body begin? So, of course, I've got an arm, right? And I've got 5 fingers, but I actually think that these fingers are part of the whole of me. And I can kind of prove it because I can't actually tell where they stop and start unless I imagine an imaginary line. My neurons disperse throughout my entire body. Tell me where my mind... Right now, I just put my attention in my right little toe. So did you as soon as I mentioned it, right?
I actually did my left.
Oh, did you? All right, because you're a contrarian.
Well, actually, I just did it.
So now your mind's in there, right? But it wasn't before. So mind is dispersed throughout our entire system, and what we need to be highly cautious of is that is that what we say to ourselves internally with internal dialogue, what we say to others, how we view ourselves, how we cast identities upon ourselves, all of these act upon the embodied systems to either keep us healthy and drive us forward to be the best that we can be. And now I sound like Tony Robbins, but I'm just using that as a loose expression of positive going towards, or they completely undermine us and will both undermine our health, will undermine our ability to interact with others, will undermine, there's a fantastic study in my first book, Untrain Your Brain. I write about a study in California where I think it was 9,000 people. I wrote in 2014, so forgive if I get the stats a little bit wrong, but it's about 9,000 people who were studied, who were split between optimists and pessimists, identified through some. And look, we've always got to be cautious of the way these studies are designed. But what they found was that optimists, which we'll loosely say are people who are not holding as much negative internal self-talk and negative expression and view on the world, irrespective of their lifestyle habits, whether they smoked, whether they drank, whether they went to church or had community interaction, or whether they were married or single or parents or brothers, irrespective of all lifestyle factors, optimists live I think it's about 9-10 years longer than pessimists.
That's cool.
Now, that's not to say optimism is a thing. So people listen to that and they go, "Oh, you've got to be an optimist." It's to say that that category we're calling optimism, which is a ability to project a more fluid, positive view of the world and ourselves, that is having an effect on the embodied systems that we call mind. But is all of us. All of our tissue is mind. There's an intelligence in all of the cells to some degree. And I use that word loosely, intelligence, but there is an intentionality. Otherwise, they wouldn't work in the way they work. We're not robots, we're not these reductionist machines that have cogs and wheels operating. There seems to be an intentionality, and I don't mean from a sort of spiritual woo-woo perspective, but there is a intelligence throughout the whole system that keeps us formed in this morphogenic field of blubber. And we know that when someone steps on our toe, that it hurts down there because it's not separated from the rest of us.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the right hemisphere, isn't it? Is the whole rather than the parts. And Western Western medicine's all about splitting things into the parts. I mean, we have hospitals, areas of the hospital named after the different parts of the body, like obs and gynae, or skeletal, musculoskeletal stuff. I think it's probably worth saying, because I think there's a lot of crap on the internet about hemisphere differences. And one of the reasons why it probably hasn't been researched as much as it should have been is because there was so many generalizations in pop psychology, right? Like the left hemisphere was the male hemisphere and the right was the female, and the left was rational and the right was irrational, and the right was creative. And so basically, and it really turned off a lot of scientists from looking at hemisphere differences, but it's kind of come back around now. And Ian McIlgrist was probably the person who pushed that the most, right? Or also Michael Gangizer did loads of the split brain research, right? And it's sort of like, it is without a doubt that there are these two hemispheres and there are differences in. It's not really what they do, it's how they process the world, right? As I seem to understand it. It's not like, the left hemisphere does math. It's like both hemispheres would approach maths in a different way. And the right hemisphere might approach a mathematical problem in like a more of as a whole maybe like seeing it. Like I'm really not a mathematician, but you have these mathematicians talk about how like an answer would just come. It would appear like they'd solve the problem, and that seems to be more right hemisphere than the left hemisphere, which is probably better at counting, breaking down a problem.
And knowing where to place that intuition that came up. So Michael Gigerenzer, is it Gigerenzer?
Ganziger?
Yeah. No,
Italian.
Ganziger, yeah. So he studied intensely the what happens when people have had the left hemisphere or the right hemisphere of their brains mostly destroyed. And there's people that have had that happen, and that there's some really famous people that we mentioned in the book who are sort of famous in the neuroscience and brain world. And what happens there, and what typically happens if you have if you lose the left hemisphere, you can still function enormously well with the right hemisphere, but you can't really remember anything, and you can't really categorize it properly, and you can't put things like you wouldn't know how to. If you had a bunch of stuff on your bed and a suitcase, you might not know that the stuff on the bed was meant to go in the suitcase because you're traveling tomorrow. But you can use the stuff, and you have some sense of knowing that you put the shoes on your feet, and you can. You wear your dress, and I don't wear dresses, but you might. I doubt you do much. But you can put your kilt on, or But the categorization process of being able to understand that it has to go in the suitcase in a certain way, or you might not realize that the red shoes would go well with the red dress, as opposed to one red shoe, one yellow shoe, and so what the left hemisphere is incredibly good at is categorizing and compressing and putting things in. But the term the left hemisphere essentially justifies what the right has already done. Comes from the same scientist, and I can't remember how to pronounce his name properly, but it's he says that the left hemisphere says, I did that, and it makes up any old shit to justify what the right hemisphere has already inspired or provoked or in some way prompted seconds beforehand. And you have this paradox, don't you, of where the left hemisphere happens after the right hemisphere has already done it, but the left hemisphere likes to jump on it and say, that was me, yeah, that was me, I own that, when it wasn't at all.
Yeah, there's really crazy studies, isn't there, with split brain patients where the corpus callosum, which is it's a big mesh of neurons, isn't it, that connects the two hemispheres. Some people have that cut because it was an epilepsy treatment, right? So it was cut for health reasons, but then these people went on to become subjects in the split brain research. And there's so cool studies where that you flash some information. So if you flash information in the right eye, the left hemisphere can interpret it because it's opposite. Or if you hold something in your right hand, the left hemisphere can see it, or feel it, or something like that. And then, so it's almost like you have these weird situations where the left hemisphere almost has a personality of its own, and so does the right hemisphere. And you have these weird things where the right hemisphere is cold, so wants to put the jacket on, and the left hemisphere has been told that they need to take the jacket off. Really weird stuff that makes you kind of question whether there's almost two seats of consciousness in there, does it feel something to be a right hemisphere versus a left hemisphere?
So all of those, the real big studies, I remember the name now because my right hemisphere gave it to me. My left, when it was trying to find it, couldn't because it was forcing it. It's Henry Mollinson, who had one of his hemispheres completely destroyed through some...
Oh, yeah, HM he was called, wasn't
HM.
he?
And so there's a whole... And in our book, we go into it in some depth. So the idea that there's two seats of consciousness. So I think Gregory Bateson, who is my all-time intellectual hero, who wrote Steps to an Ecology of Mind, and he was an anthropologist and mathematician, but he spent a lot of time in different tribal communities looking at the patterns of behavior, and he was a true expert in the exploration of patterning in human interaction, but not just human interaction, but interaction with the world. Anyway, Bateson, and there's a fantastic documentary about him with his that his daughter made, Nora Bateson, which I think you can probably find on YouTube. He's an absolute genius, one of the most underappreciated minds, I think, of all time. But he makes the point in Mind and Matter, which is one of his books, which is incredible, that that we absolutely do have these very distinct differences between the unconscious and the conscious mind, the left and the right hemisphere and the dominances. And they're so distinctly different that they have caused problems throughout evolution, because they have these functions that are very good from this survival process. But in the modern world, where we are spurred on by these unconscious promptings to eat all the food, or to have all the sex, or to take all the, or to be wild, or to, just live based on a sense of feeling where we should go, which has been completely distorted, because it is trained as well. It's not inherent. These, we have certain instincts that, well, do we? Maybe we have some instincts that are inherent, but the majority of our instincts are trained, of course. They're contextual. Mm-hmm. But we now live in a world where we have to be so highly constrained. If I want to go and walk around in the jungle naked and I live in the forest, no big deal. But if I want to go and walk around the streets of London naked, I'm going to get arrested and taken away in a white truck. So I have to constrain my unconscious other mind that wants to do all this wild stuff, which is probably why there's so many expressions of people doing crazy shit, in the context that is appropriate, whether that's wild parties or carnival expressions, or like in carnival, it's all right to pretend to be an animal, right, in certain contexts, but you can't walk down the street pretending you're an animal. Although nowadays in certain states in the US you probably can, because you can identify as it. Let's not get into identity politics on this one, but you can identify as a chimpanzee, and you could probably get away with it now. But what the left hemisphere has done is it's created very tight constraints for us to live in an orderly society, and I think there's huge benefits to that. But there's also a lot of repression of expression of the right hemisphere. As a father, I've had the last 10 years of watching two little boys do the weirdest, funkiest, absurd shit, right, that it's just normal childhood creative expression, where they'll talk to each other for 15 minutes in grunts and whistles and robot type stuff. Now, I want to go, dudes, what are you doing? But I realise they're just playing with the range of their world. They can do it safely. Yeah. If they did that in their jiu-jitsu class, they would be mortified by the response. And they don't, of course, because they know everyone would think they're loons. Yeah. I guarantee all their friends, kids, also do that kind of expression in the safety of their homes. And so we live in a constant state of almost battle or contention between the two hemispheres. One wants to just be free to express itself, and the other says, no, we live in these constrained societies where you have to do it just like this. Is anything
so what can we do then? Like how
Good.
Do we get
the first practical question?
This stuff? Yeah, practical stuff.
Years ago, I called Ian McGilchrist, and I found his email address online, and then I saw that his email address was matched to his.
Can we get him on the podcast?
Well,
know him well enough?
No, I don't. I only spoke to him once. He was incredibly generous with his time, and because I found his email address online somewhere from the university. Or maybe it was on Company's House. I was stalking him, and then I found him on Skype against the email, and I just messaged him on Skype, and he said, "Yeah, I'm available for a call." It was like, what? One of my intellectual heroes. So I called him, and he lives up in Scotland next to the Talisker whiskey plant, and he likes a dram or two. And we had this.
So now all the real stalkers can find him.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Good luck. I think it's pretty remote up there. But so we had this fantastic conversation, and at the time I was interested in his view on what we can do from the right and left hemisphere understanding to be able to help with people who are overweight, right? And because if you think about people who get overweight, typically it is an eating problem. I mean, some people have underlying thyroid issues and metabolic syndromes and the likes, but for the majority of people, it's just that they're eating too much, or they're eating at the wrong times, or they're cramming their calories because they've gone the whole day without eating, and then they eat a massive meal at night, or whatever, right? Or they're eating all the wrong foods, and some combination of all of that. But at the end of the day, if you stop, so for me, I've always been, as you know, I'm typically been like a rake, skinny. I'm genetically, that's the kind of expression. I come from a tall, skinny family. But whenever I start to put on weight, I feel it. I notice it. And I've had a few, I've had 9 months of not climbing because of injuries or doing any exercise because I've been overworked. And I'm like, fuck, I just feel the way my belly's starting to really puff out. The majority of people that you speak to who have become overweight, they don't have a very strong connection to the sensations or the signals because they've been repressed through childhood, sometimes through trauma, through just being told that intuition or those signals are not valid. So it's a very hemispheric based problem. You're ignoring what the right's telling you because the left is saying, no, keep on working, then you'll eat later. And then all of a sudden the right just comes flooding in, or the emotional eating comes flooding in, and then people just completely splurge and they'll eat 5,000 calories in one meal. Anyway, so I expressed this to Ian McGilchrist, and I sort of wanted some practical solutions from it. And I, as a massive fan of his work, I was a bit disappointed because he said, well, there was a study that showed that if you have H. pylori, it helps lose weight. And I said, what?
What's H. pylori?
It's a bacterial infection. And I said, no, but I want to know how to get people back into the right hemisphere and to create this balance. He said, I think people should probably go for more walks and maybe climb a tree. And so he didn't, because he's a superb academic, but he didn't actually have a practical approach to it. And I don't think that's his gig.
Well, it's interesting because I was hoping for that in the book, because I haven't got to the end of the book yet, and I was hoping for like a life guide, No,
it doesn't exist.
Right.
What I would suggest, so think about this. So I live in Bali, as you know, the greatest place on planet Earth to ride motorbikes. And I say that noting that I could be on thin ice. I have a couple of quite fast motorbikes, and the reason it's the greatest place here is because almost everyone rides motorbikes. There's 4 million people on the island, and I think there's there's millions of mopeds everywhere, and there's not really any speed limits. So, and nobody ever beeps at you for driving like a moron. So if you've ever driven in Italy, you'll know that there's very strict rules, which is that you have to stay on one side of the road, but you also have to know the sort of unwritten rules, which is that you can tailgate people and you can overtake people. And well, here that's on steroids, it's times 10. There's no undertaking lane or overtaking lane. You do whatever you want.
Yeah.
And then, so I drive really fast from here to the airport. I don't drive fast when my kids are on the bike. That's not true. I don't drive as fast. But when I go to the airport, I try and make it a race. I've got from here to the airport in 28 minutes. Now, Google Maps says it's 60. So I go pretty far. I'm on a 500cc motorbike. Now, I stick to the left-hand side of the road, which is the correct side of the road, as the rules are based here. I also stop at the traffic lights. And I also go slow as I come to the junctions and stop at the junctions because those are the rules. This is the left hemisphere, right? I stick to the rigidity of it. But the rest of it, where I'm having people overtaking me on the left and the right, and I'm having cars pulling out in front of me without any indicators, and people going, that all has to come from the right. It has to be a balance where I am in an intuitive response, because I can't react, not with the speeds I'm going, I can't react fast enough to the flow of the traffic. It's like a shoal of birds. A shoal? That's fish. Shoal of fish or a flock of birds. And there's this constant movement. I stay rigid for the left hemisphere on the left-hand side of the road. I don't cross over unless, actually, that's not true. I do sometimes because it's necessary. But also, I'm allowing my intuitive unconscious response. And this is a metaphor and also an actual way of doing it. In climbing, you have a certain set of rules if you want to stay alive and safe. And those rules relate to the gear, and they relate to the equipment, and they relate to the spacing between the last piece of gear, and if you fall at this point, you're going to hit the floor. But if you overemphasize your attention on those factors, you don't climb well, because climbing is at its finest and at its best is a right hemispheric expression of flow. And so, but you want to stay alive. This is why people like Alex Honnold, can go for flow in 3 hours without feeling much pressure, because he's just completely in his right hemisphere. He's probably done all the left hemisphere stuff when he's practiced El Cap 50 times on a top rope, and he's done all the analytics.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, the place for the left hemisphere is like the strategy. It's like,
exactly,
where do I fix my ropes? Like making a map of the wall. If I do this at this time of the day, will I be in the sun? And some climbing's a little bit like that. Like you might be on a ledge and you might need to look up and maybe plan your route a little bit. But I actually think that a lot of that is not as helpful as it sounds like.
So even on
to see some studies into hemisphere difference and flow, because I don't think there's really been any, right?
There's not a lot. No, there's not a lot. I mean, there's a few that we reference in Resilience by Design, and we looked and looked and looked. There's not a lot. But the problem is in modern day living is that there's not much opportunity to express this balance between the two hemispheres. It's probably why climbing's so addictive, is because when it's done well, you have that left hemispheric strategic piece, get another piece of gear in, because you've got to move 15 feet until you can get the next one. Now switch off the left and move into flow. Pull hard on the move. Allow your body, in embodied mind, to move through this. To when you've done your best on-sites, there's a part strategy there that is analysing a bit, but if you overanalyze it, it's mostly
it's
mostly flow.
Yeah, it's mostly intuitive. Exactly. I actually think that some of this depends on how much of an expert you are. I think there's got to be a bit more of the left hemisphere when you're new.
Correct.
Because even like placing a piece of gear feels almost intuitive to me. I have a sense that I need to place the piece of gear now because of how far I've been from the last piece. It's not, if I'm in flow and I'm climbing at my best, I'm not like, oh, where did I put my last piece? It's been a few meters. I need to place a piece now. It's more of an intuition, even that stuff.
It's pattern recognition to the environment.
Yeah.
Which is, by the way, is what intuition is. Intuition isn't some blessing from the angels or some caprice. It's actually just an embodied recognition of the patterns in the environment and how to respond to those patterns in the environment. So it's not
that are too complex to process in the
left hemisphere,
mind,
in the
right?
conscious, exactly.
Yeah.
So it's not true that all dark alleyways at 1 a.m. are dangerous, right? Mm-hmm. But if you're about to walk down a dark alleyway and you recognize the pattern that there could be a risk there, you are probably going to have an intuitive sense of, ooh, what am I doing? It's not true that all graveyards are dangerous places. Now, we've also been trained to think that there's spooky shit going on. But it's not true that all aeroplanes are dangerous. But we have a pattern recognition that there could be a danger there. And so for many people, it will over-amplify, which is why fear in climbing is an over-amplification of what could go wrong. And it's important to be able to get that balance where you have the pattern recognition that there's risk, but you can use the left hemisphere to analyze whether the risk is viable to take and whether you can mitigate it. And then when you've done that, then you can let go into flow. And that's the tricky part, of course, and that comes with experience, because you can't recognize a pattern in an environment that you haven't had the experience of. So the more climbs you climb, the more ability you have to move seamlessly through, because you can recognize the patterns of the rock and the ability to move through it. And this is a metaphor for life.
Yeah, and that's why what I call mental training, which you might not like, is it has to come from experience.
Absolutely.
You can't just be told you're safe there and then you just get to switch off that threat response. You have to learn that threat response isn't serving you through having experiences.
It's absurd climbing. Think about it. We willingly put our lives at risk for no obvious benefit or outcome other than moments of the right hemisphere taking over and us feeling these experiences of flow and maybe some retrospective satisfaction that we talk about in the pub later on. It's complete. It's absolutely logical that you would have a signal coming from your unconscious saying, "What the fuck are you doing? Stop it! Come down."
And you're talking about, do we have like innate instincts and stuff? We do. I think like the what they've kind of decided, scientists, is that the most likely two innate fears that we have are loud noises and drops.
Yeah,
so
heights.
edges.
Yeah.
So if you get like a tiny baby and you put them on a fake edge before they've even learned that that's bad, they know it's bad. And we're like choosing a sport that triggers that. And then people come to me and they're like, "What's wrong with me? Why am I afraid of falling?" I'm like, your body's literally flying through the air at a high speed off the edge, and it's being caught by a tiny skinny rope, and you think that it's not normal for you to be afraid. Of course you're going to have a fear response, but luckily, we can change that.
Yeah, it's about experience to the pattern of risk so that you can learn to let go of the constraints that you should have in place initially. You should have lots of constraints over when and how you fall when you're a beginner climber. My wife nearly died from climbing for 1 year in because she'd followed me up E5s and watched me climb some E7 in the leap that morning, and she'd followed me up the E5 to warm up. And then she goes off to go and climb an HVS. Is it HVS or E1? Not Lucky. What's the famous one down at the St. Govern's?
St. Govern's, isn't it?
Whatever it's called. It's had loads of accidents on it. Steve McClure, actually, his best mate, nearly died falling off of it years ago. And she goes up it thinking she can climb E5 when she can't. She doesn't have any ability to detect the fact that she's put loose wires in, the rock is wet, and she's never led anything at this stage. Just because, So, and then she falls and breaks her wrist and has to have 4 operations on it. It is important to acknowledge the signals saying that there is risk. Those signals are called fear. But it's also important to know when to allow a different state to take over, which is one of flow and relaxation. That's why you do what you do. Mm-hmm. Teaching people how to do it.
What about meditation as a way to entrain? Because that's sort of apart from climbing, I think meditation's the thing that I do that helps me be better connected to my body. And when I say my body, my mind that's in my body.
Your embodied mind.
Things like, so the sensations of hunger, that kind of thing, that you can train your mind to be more aware of those sensations. And I've found that meditation is probably one of the best ways to do that. Just wondering what you think about meditation, how much you practice it, or if you do at all, and whether that's a good way to be more connected to our bodies.
I'm saving it in the same way I'm saving golf. So I've actually done a lot of meditation over the years. I did Vipassana retreats, and I've studied Buddhism. I say studied Buddhism. I've read maybe 20 books on Buddhism, and I've done a lot of meditation, and I will once in a while meditate, but I'm not meditating for any spiritual, reasons, because I don't even know what the word spiritual means. It's such an abstract word, and it means different things to different people. I like to sometimes just sit cross-legged with my spine straight, monitoring my breath to see how messed up my jumble of thoughts actually are, because it acts like it's like watching it on a screen and being able to see just how much nonsense is running.
Like an audit of the mind, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. But I also I'm saving it for when I'm older, like golf. Because you got to save some stuff, right? I'm going to be. I'm surfing at the moment.
I'm saving paragliding.
Yeah. Oh well, I'll come and join you on that actually, because that's something I really want to get into. But I say that sort of slightly jokingly because I like the idea of what meditation has been utilised for across the spiritual. I do that I don't believe in the spiritual, but what the Buddhist traditions and the Zen. And that is to be able to let go of our desire for the things in life, the cravings and the aversions, right? We either live in a seemingly constant craving something, more of comfort, more of pleasure, or in some people's cases it may be pain, or we're trying to avert from something. I don't want to be homeless. I don't want to be hungry. I don't want to see my children sick. I don't want to. And so this is the nature of life, of course, that we live in this constantly changing and complex and turbulent world where we have to navigate it. But the one given is that we're all going to die. And I'm really, without sounding morbid or like I'm in some death cult, I'm really obsessed by the idea of death to the point of thinking about it every day, because I think it's a wonderful constraint that really pushes on us the need to live. I think my father died when he was only 33 and I was 16. Was that right? He was 18 when he's 34. And so that for me, and it was so unexpected and so sudden and dramatic and tragic that at 16 it had this massive imprint on me, like, you have to make the most of every single minute. And I think unconsciously I thought I would not outlive my father. In that I thought, he died at 34. I was free soloing, mostly at my limit, because I was technically not competent to be doing a lot of the stuff I was doing, but I was somehow getting up them. The climbs. And so I think I had something of an internal piece on, I'm going to die young anyway, so I'm going to maximize life. And I still live like that, but I mean, sometimes on my motorbike I wonder if I've got rid of it. But death is the constraint. Now, I've seen a few people die, and I've seen, I worked in Haiti after the earthquake, and then I went back subsequently working in IDP camps, and I went to the Philippines after Typhoon Haiyan, and I've been in a whole bunch of NGO situations, and I saw a lot of people die in Haiti. I had babies die in my arms, all sorts of, really dramatic and at the time tragic stuff. And people don't die very well, typically. I mean, unless they're old and it's coming. And my grandmother died 2 years ago in a care home. Worst thing that ever happened. But she wanted to die by the end. But for 6 months, she was fearful. I think the best thing about meditation, and I wonder whether it's not really the real reason why it's was developed to the degree it has been with the Buddhists and Zen and the likes, is because if you can get rid of all your fears and all your cravings and aversions, you don't want anything more, and you're not avoiding anything more. Well, that's like a living death in some way. It's like the absolute ultimate point of freedom. If you've got nothing that you really desire in life, and you've got nothing that you're trying to avoid, then when you die, it's probably going to be a lot easier because you're not holding on to anything. And so I'm saving it for when I'm assuming I'm going to make it to 90, because I look after myself, I do my best, but I could walk out of here and get hit on there by a coconut. 90 people a year or something die from coconuts.
Or more likely you'll crash your motorbike.
Or I crash my motorbike. Thank you, Hazel. I mean, this may actually be the last podcast that I ever do, because it's got something of a dramatic effect to it. I don't mind that. My finances are in good order. But I see that a bit like golf. Like golf to me seems like something you do as an old person when you've got absolutely nothing left to do. Because it's so pointless. What a ridiculous way to ruin a walk around a field. And so I see meditation in that perspective. That's probably not the answer you were expecting or wanting.
I mean, I would say that so what you're talking about there, like not craving and not being adverse, equanimity, I think that takes a really, really long time to master.
I'm going to do it the last year, after I finish partying on my 90th birthday.
So your 90th birthday, you're just going to spend the whole of your final year in meditation rather than with your friends and family. So
I hope you understand what I just said was slightly tongue-in-cheek, but that's my perspective on... So I don't want to be without fears and cravings, right? I like this world, and I like
but you
wanting.
won't... There's just no, unless you're meditating like at least 3 hours a day, you're just not going to get rid of those aversions and that craving.
Well, what else is there to do when you're 90? Apart from play golf?
Dampening them down a bit, isn't it? And like for me, like what I learned with the Vipassana and stuff is just the aversion and cravings I have to my own thinking. You know, like there's some thoughts that feel nice to think, and there's some thoughts that don't feel nice to think. And I don't want to be like, I don't want my actions, my behaviors, how I feel to be pulled in the direction of what I like to think about, you know?
But do you? So
but to be honest, it sounds like you meditate already because you sit down and you watch your breath.
Well, yeah, but but hold on a sec. So I don't have that problem of much. I don't have that problem much of having negative thoughts, because I haven't bought into the idea that my thoughts are something that they do arise from the right hemisphere and unconscious, right? But I guess maybe it's the eternal optimist in me, or maybe it's the years of working with people who have ruined their lives through negative self-talk and negative thoughts so that I've gone, oh, fuck, I don't want to go that route. But there is very little of my thinking that isn't positive and towards positive outcomes. I'm an activist, and I think this is really important. I feel like I have agency in all areas of my life. I don't have control, because we could all get hit by a meteorite. I could get hit off my bike. But I have a deep sense of being an activist in my life in all areas. I do not, my wife will tell you this because it drives her mad. I don't accept anything below a certain level of excellence in my life, because I don't see the point, right? And if I can't achieve a certain level of excellence in my life, be my relationship or cooking dinner or being a father, then that to me will create a really strong signal from the unconscious that I'm not hitting the point that I value most in life, which is to be my best and to do my best. Now I sound a bit like Tony Robbins, but for me, the idea that I would allow myself to wallow in self-pity or negative thoughts, or that's based on
but that's an extreme,
it's not, though. I know
even being driven by positive thoughts, like you want to be able to notice what they are and whether they're something that
yeah, but
obviously we can talk
the word
about
positive
your thoughts not really actually meaning anything. You're having the thought you want to be your best. It's just a thought. It's not.
But it's not. It's no. It's an absolute outcome that is well formed that I'm working towards. So if I see a pattern,
like a belief.
No, if I see a pattern in my life that is not. No, it's not, because it's not something I'm fixed to. I'm not dogmatic about it. So right now in my work, I have a certain outcome that I'm trying to achieve in the role that I'm taking on, right? And I've given myself 5 years to get to that outcome. And so, of course, every day there's feedback from the environment saying you're not getting there because this didn't work, or that didn't work, or that type of approach didn't work. But I don't take that and then go, shit, I'm useless, or I'm a failure, or I shouldn't be doing this. Mm-hmm. I take it from a learning perspective and I reintegrate it to go, how do I utilize what could be called the negative to progress forward to this ultimate outcome over a 5-year period that I want. It also helps, and we haven't touched on this, and I could go on for this, for hours about this, but to have a third position perspective. So again, in our book, the whole chapter is on perspectives. First position, the I, which is me feeling my backside on this little stool, feeling the hunger in my stomach, being aware of my feelings right now, or my state. Second position is me going second on you and getting some perception of what it's like to be Hazel. You can't be in a long-term healthy relationship without a second position. You have to go second position on other people to be able to have good relationships. The third is the ability to take an objective position on yourself and others, where you're taking away all the values and beliefs and you're identifying the patterns. And then you're utilizing that information to actually reintegrate back into first or into second. And so this is the objective viewer. And so anytime that I might fall into what you might say is a kind of negative thinking, I will go into a third position instinctively, because I've done it hundreds of times as a training program, and I've trained it to many people. I'll go into a third and I'll look objectively at where those patterns of thinking are coming from. I'll take that information, I'll reorganize it, and then I'll bring it back. And that happens internally. There's an external process for doing it. Again, not wanting to keep plugging the book, but in Resilience by Design, there's a whole chapter on perspectives and why that's really important. So if you live in a first position, you're called Donald Trump. You have no perspective on your effect on other people. This is what sociopaths, sociopaths do go.
It's weird though, because the first position could also just be like a non-dual state, right? Like, obviously, first position in terms of your relationship with other people is weird, and if you only live in that, then obviously you can't imagine what it's like or empathize with others. But also, you could imagine a first position which would just be, I'm connected to my conscious experience, what I'm feeling through my senses right now, kind of present state, right?
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I didn't say that first position is bad. Every athlete who has...
I don't think Donald Trump's in there, though.
No, that's not what I'm saying.
Two different first positions.
I said if you only have a first position, right? So I'm using him as a sort of
but he's
a metaphor.
In his head thinking me.
Correct, that's the first position.
I'm great. Yeah, but I'm saying there's a different first position, which is you... it's almost like a cross between the first and third position, where you're connected to your senses, the information you're getting through your senses. You might observe a thought, but you're not with a sense of self in the same way, right? It's a non-dual.
So if the next time you're climbing, free soloing, and you ought to be in first position, pretty much predominantly because you want to feel the texture of the hold, you want to feel the friction, you want to be able to know whether the lactic acid building up in your arms is going to overload you before you get to that, to the top. So you need all of the senses available in first position. You don't want to be thinking, what would my partner think if I die and fall on the rocks? Which I've had in solo.
Totally.
Right?
I mean, so there's being lost in thought, right? And I think that to me is why meditation's useful, is because I can train. I'm better aware of when I'm lost in thought versus when I'm not lost in thought.
Yeah, I'm not saying don't meditate. If you want to.
Yeah, a lot of people don't know when they're lost in thought, and I definitely don't a lot of the time. I can be lost in thought and then go, you've just been thinking about this for a while. Like, has that been useful?
So I would highly recommend, whether you do it from our book or any number of other books out there that show how to go into those positions, to actually train a third position. So actually go through a training drill to develop a third position, because what you're doing is you're training your unconscious to alert you when you've been too much predominantly either in the first or the second. And so this is a creation of awareness. You end up, and now you don't want to, you don't overdo third position because it's so objective. It's free of empathy. It's free of emotion. It's free of the joy of hugging a child, or it's robot mode. But when you train it explicitly through training drills in the same way you would train certain moves in climbing, it then starts to unconsciously pop in. So you have this balance between the three. When I'm with my partner or my wife or my kids or my business partners, I'm in and out of second, first and third. If I'm going for a swim or a surf, I'm in first most of the time and just enjoying the experience. What I meant by the Donald Trump analogy is that he doesn't have a second, and he certainly doesn't have an objective, right? There's no empathy there. I've got nothing against him personally. I would highly recommend that people, and actually for me, that's my meditation, is in third. Is going into an objective. Right. That gives me perspective on me and my world around me.
Yeah, I guess I probably need to train that, because I don't know exactly how to be completely objective. I feel like it's hard to separate my experiences and everything out. But I think what I probably do that's a bit similar. And this is, something that me and my partner talk about quite often, is sort of like, is it like a zooming out, that kind of like bird's eye view, and sort of going, how would someone else see this?
That's a third. Well, if you identify with the someone else, and that's an actual person you know the patterns of, then you're going more into second. But bird's eye view is an exact metaphor for a third position. So shamans in indigenous communities, they have the ability to go into a third, and they might even go second, third. So they take on, they adopt an animal or something like an eagle looking down. But it's a perspective on the tribe that isn't in that immediate first and second. And that's what makes them special, because this is actually something that a lot of people don't have developed in their cognition, in their mind, is the ability to take on a third. Most of us live between first and second. If you're someone who's a people pleaser, you're always in second, and that is wearing. Therapists who go too deep in with their client, go too deep in second, they often get as sick as their clients, and they get burned out. First position, you can be in it a lot. It's great if you're a special forces soldier or a professional athlete or a public speaker. You want to be in first, and then you want to pop into second to see if you're boring your audience, right? If you're a public speaker. But the balance between the three, third is the hardest one to develop, but I'd say it's the magic to being able to pop out and have some degree. You can't be objective. Remember, we don't know.
Like a way that I would think about it is like that non-judgmental
perspective. Correct. You're looking at patterns. You're not looking.
Non-judger.
Yeah, you're looking at patterns without judgment. So you are looking at the behaviour at the level of pattern rather than the level of content. So you're not saying, when I look at Mike over there, so if I'm in third and I'm looking at Mike interacting because I've stepped out and I'm rerunning something that happened earlier in the day, and I go, Mike's being an asshole. That's not objective, and that's not a pattern. What I'm saying is, Mike poked that person in the shoulder, then Mike lost his state and got angry, and then Mike swore at him and then swivered on his heel and walked away. And so I haven't, even the word anger is the wrong term. He lost his state. He went red in the face, his movements were erratic, and he walked away talking loudly using swear words. The consequence of that was that person's never going to do business with him again. By the way, this has never happened. I'm just making this up. The consequences of that is that a person's never going to do. So I've objectively looked at the pattern of the behaviour, the interaction. I haven't said, Mike's an asshole because he lost his shit and he got really angry because that guy made him angry, which is a cause-effect relationship, which is bullshit as well, because no one can make you angry. So it's the ability to look at patterns, and that will get you as close to objectivity as you can.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really important skill, especially in human relationships, for sure, because it's so hard to take yourself out of it.
Even in climbing, though,
there's all
like viewing yourself up on the wall from a clean third, where you've got no emotional response, and actually even using the language of third. So there's a study that comes out of one of the big universities. It's about 5 years old. That people who suffer PTSD and high levels of self-prescribed stress, when they talk about the problem or the experience just from a third, so they say Mike had this accident and Mike got his leg broken and Mike got beaten up, it immediately reduces the sympathetic response in the system. If, however, you take that a step further and you step out and you visualize or you see Mike in the accident, you've created a dissociation, and the further you move away, the less of the associative, meaning the signals, the feelings are going to impact. So you can do that on the wall. You can look at yourself up there and you can speak in a third. Mike climbing through that crux where he previously fell off because he was scared of the 20-foot run out. Now I'm going to offer him some advice. Mike, from down here, I can say that you need to relax and you're safe and you're blah, blah, blah. And you do it from a third, and it's game changing.
Yeah, that's cool.
That's for your clients.
Our time's kind of up.
I know, my God, up. I was meant to be at dinner about 30 minutes ago.
Sorry about that.
That's all right. I love talking to you.
You'll have to come back.
Yeah, well, you have to come to Bali, and I know the tropics is not your thing, but I do have an amazing climbing wall that I built specifically. So for your visit. We have air conditioning. We have 4 fans in there. We just had a 9A climber stay for a couple of weeks, was training in there, and he's put put all these holds on it that I thought were footholds, but it turns out that these are the handholds that 9A climbers use these days. So they're waiting.
Nice.
They're waiting for you, Hazel.
Okay, well, I'll have to visit.
Yes, indeed.
Well, yeah, thanks a lot for that chat. It was super interesting.
You're more than welcome.
Hopefully
Anytime.
more to come.
Absolutely.
All right, thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed that conversation. If you'd like to learn more about what Strong Mind is up to, you can check out our website, strongmindclimbing.com. On that, you can access our online course, the Strong Mind course, and we have a free taster course. And you can also check out our one-to-one coaching options.